Sarah Morningstar's trembling hand stopped mid-reach for the witness stand rail, her dark eyes widening as the courthouse door creaked open behind her. The packed courtroom of Broken Arrow Township fell silent, except for the rhythmic tick of the wall clock counting down to her death sentence. It wasn't just another spectator. It was Daniel Crow Feather. Mrs. Henderson's fan clattered to the wooden floor, and old Pete Morrison's jaw went slack, his tobacco juice dribbling down his chin. Children pressed against their mothers' skirts as whispers erupted like wildfire through the suffocating Oklahoma heat. Sarah's mind flashed to 3 years ago. Daniel's calloused hands braiding wildflowers into her black hair beneath the cottonwood trees, promising they'd build a life together on Cherokee land. Now she stood accused of murdering Judge Thornfield, the man who'd saved her from the reservation as a child. "Order in my court!" Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like thunder. Who was this ghost from her past, and why had he returned to watch her hang? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Daniel's spurs clinked against the worn wooden floorboards as he walked down the center aisle, his weathered leather hat casting shadows across his angular face. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. 3 years had changed him, his shoulders broader, his jaw harder, but those storm-gray eyes still held the same intensity that once made her believe in forever. Judge Harrison peered over his wire-rimmed spectacles, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Young man, this is a court of law, not a saloon. State your business or remove yourself." Daniel stopped directly behind Sarah, close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of leather and sage that clung to his clothes. He reached into his worn coat pocket and withdrew a folded document, yellowed with age and tied with a faded red ribbon. "Your Honor, I'm here to speak for my wife." The words hit the courtroom like lightning striking dry timber. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. Wife. Gasps erupted from the gallery as women clutched their husbands' arms and men leaned forward in their seats. Mrs. Patterson fanned herself frantically while Doc Miller's medical bag tumbled from his lap. "Impossible," Prosecutor Williams sputtered, his face flushing crimson above his starched collar. "The defendant has no husband. She's been under Judge Thornfield's guardianship since she was brought from the reservation as a child." Daniel's jaw tightened at the mention of Thornfield's name. Sarah caught the flash of something dark in his expression. Pain, anger, or perhaps both. He unfolded the document with deliberate care, his calloused fingers handling it like sacred text. "Common law marriage, Your Honor. Performed 3 years ago by Elder Spotted Hawk of the Cherokee Nation with proper witnesses present." Daniel's voice carried the authority of a man who'd learned to fight for every word. "According to territorial law, I have the right to represent my wife's interests in this proceeding." Sarah's mind reeled. She remembered that autumn evening by the creek when they'd spoken vows in Cherokee under the harvest moon, but Judge Thornfield had told her it meant nothing, that only white man's law mattered in Oklahoma territory. Her fingers unconsciously touched the small scar on her left hand where she'd cut herself during their blood oath ceremony. Judge Harrison examined the document, his bushy eyebrows knitting together like storm clouds. The courtroom held its collective breath, the only sounds the tick of the clock and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. "This appears to be legitimate," Harrison finally conceded, though his tone suggested he'd rather declare otherwise. "However, Mr." He paused, waiting. "Crow Feather. Daniel Crow Feather." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Daniel had returned, but why now? Where had he been when Thornfield died screaming her name? And most terrifying of all, did he know the secret that would destroy them both if it ever came to light? Judge Harrison's gavel struck the bench with finality. "Mr. Crow Feather, while this document appears legitimate, it doesn't change the facts of this case. Your wife stands accused of poisoning Judge Thornfield with arsenic. The evidence is overwhelming. Daniel's eyes never left Sarah's face as she turned to look at him for the first time. The years had carved lines around her dark eyes, and he could see the weight of survival in the way she held her shoulders, rigid, defensive, like a cornered animal. But beneath the fear, he glimpsed something else. Relief. She wasn't alone anymore. What evidence? Daniel's voice carried across the silent courtroom like a challenge. Prosecutor Williams rose from his chair, his confidence returning as he gestured toward a small glass vial on the evidence table. The defendant was found with this bottle of arsenic and her personal effects. Judge Thornfield died in agony, his body racked with the classic symptoms of arsenic poisoning. She was the only person in the house that night, the only one who prepared his evening tea. Sarah's hands trembled in her lap. She remembered that terrible night. Thornfield gasping for air, his face contorted in pain as he pointed a shaking finger at her. "You did this," he had wheezed before collapsing. The housekeeper had found the arsenic bottle hidden beneath Sarah's mattress the next morning, wrapped in her Cherokee prayer cloth like some damning confession. Daniel studied the vial, then turned his attention to Williams. Where did this arsenic come from? The defendant obviously obtained it for the purpose of murder, perhaps from the apothecary, or— "Did anyone see her purchase it?" Daniel interrupted. Williams faltered. "Well, no, but did anyone see her handle it, prepare it, add it to anything Judge Thornfield consumed?" The prosecutor's face reddened. "The circumstances speak for themselves." She had motive. Judge Thornfield had refused her request to visit the Cherokee reservation. She had opportunity. She lived in his house, prepared his meals. She had means. The arsenic was found in her possession. Daniel walked slowly toward the evidence table, his boots echoing in the hushed courtroom. Sarah watched him move with the careful grace she remembered, like a predator assessing its surroundings. He picked up the vial, holding it to the light streaming through the tall windows. "This bottle is nearly full," he observed. "If my wife used it to poison the judge, why is so little missing?" Williams opened his mouth to respond, but Daniel continued. "And why would she keep the evidence hidden in her own room? Seems mighty convenient that it was found so easily." Sarah felt a flicker of hope kindle in her chest. Daniel was doing what her court-appointed attorney had failed to do, asking the right questions. But she also felt a chill of terror. There were things about that night she hadn't told anyone, couldn't tell anyone, secrets that would damn them both if they came to light. Judge Harrison leaned forward. "Are you suggesting someone planted evidence, Mr. Crowfeather?" "I'm suggesting that a man who spent his life sending people to their deaths might have made enemies. Maybe someone wanted Judge Thornfield dead and found the perfect person to blame." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Sarah knew Daniel was walking a dangerous line. Judge Thornfield had been beloved by the white settlers of Broken Arrow Township. He'd brought law and order to the territory, they said. He'd civilized the Cherokee children in his care, giving them Christian names and proper education. To suggest he had enemies was to question the very foundation of their community. But Sarah knew better. She had lived in Thornfield's house for 15 years, had seen the man behind the respected facade, the way he flew into rages when his whiskey ran low, the visits from desperate Cherokee families begging for news of children who had vanished into his educational program, the locked room in the cellar that servants were forbidden to enter. Most damning of all, she knew the truth about her own parentage, a truth that would shatter Daniel if he ever learned it. "Your Honor," Williams sputtered, "this is pure speculation. The defendant has motive, means, and opportunity. What more do we need?" Daniel returned to Sarah's side, and for a moment his hand brushed against hers. The contact sent electricity through her entire body, a reminder of what they had once shared, what they had lost. "We need the truth," Daniel said quietly, "and I intend to find it." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the courtroom's attention pressing down on her like a physical force. Outside, thunder rumbled across the Oklahoma plains, promising a storm. She only prayed Daniel's search for truth wouldn't destroy them both before the real killer was found. The recess bell clanged through the courthouse like a death knell. Sarah found herself alone in the small holding room behind the courtroom, her wrists still bound by iron shackles that had rubbed her skin raw. The walls seemed to close in around her as she replayed Daniel's unexpected appearance. 3 years of silence, and now he returned when she needed him most, or when it was too late. The door creaked open, and Daniel stepped inside, his hat in his hands. Deputy Morrison followed, keys jangling at his belt. 5 minutes, the deputy grunted. That's all the judge allows. When they were alone, Daniel pulled a chair close to Sarah's bench, but didn't sit. Instead, he knelt before her, his gray eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Why didn't you send word?" His voice was barely above a whisper, rough with emotion. 3 years, Sarah. 3 years I waited for some sign you were alive. Sarah's throat constricted. She had sent word, letter after desperate letter hidden in the Cherokee prayer pouches that Elder Spotted Hawk smuggled from the reservation. But those letters had never left Thornfield's house. She had learned later that the judge burned them in his study fireplace while she scrubbed floors on her hands and knees. "I couldn't," she managed, her voice hoarse from days of silence. "He watched everything, read every letter. I was a prisoner in that house, Daniel, a prisoner with pretty dresses and Christian prayers, but a prisoner all the same." Daniel's jaw tightened and she saw his hands clench into fists. "Tell me what happened that night. The truth, Sarah. All of it." Sarah closed her eyes, the memory washing over her like poison. "Judge Thornfield called me to his study after supper. He was different. Agitated, kept pacing by the window, muttering about Cherokee land claims and government investigators coming to town." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He asked me if I remembered my mother." The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "Your mother? But Thornfield said she died when you were a baby. Cholera outbreak on the reservation. That's what I believe, too." Sarah's hands trembled as she continued. "But that night, he pulled out a daguerreotype from his desk drawer. A woman with my eyes, my face, standing beside a Cherokee warrior in traditional dress. 'Your real parents,' he said. 'The ones I saved you from.'" Daniel stood abruptly, beginning to pace the small room like a caged wolf. "Saved you from what?" "From the truth." Sarah's voice cracked. "My father wasn't just any Cherokee warrior, Daniel. He was Chief Standing Bear's son. And my mother." She paused, gathering courage for words that would change everything. "My mother was Judge Thornfield's first wife." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stopped pacing, his back rigid as stone. When he turned to face her, his expression was unreadable. "You're saying," he began slowly, "I'm saying Judge Thornfield murdered his own wife for falling in love with a Cherokee man. Then he stole their child, me, and raised me as his ward to keep up appearances." The words tumbled out now. 15 years of buried truth pouring forth like water through a broken dam. "That night, he told me everything. How he tracked them to a hidden camp by the river. How he shot my father first, then my mother as she begged for mercy. How he told everyone she died of fever while visiting sick relatives. Daniel sank into the chair, his face pale. Jesus Christ, Sarah. Why tell you this now? After all these years? Because he was dying. Sarah's voice was barely audible. Not from poison, from the cancer eating away at his insides. Dr. Mills had given him weeks to live. He wanted to confess, he said. Clear his conscience before meeting his Maker. Then why are you on trial for murder? Sarah looked down at her shackled hands. Because after he told me the truth, I asked him about something else. Something I'd hidden from everyone, including you. She met his eyes, and he saw the depth of her pain. I asked him about the other children. Daniel's blood ran cold. What other children? The Cherokee children who disappeared over the years. The ones whose families came begging at his door, searching for sons and daughters who never came home from his educational programs. Sarah's voice broke completely now. He kept records, Daniel. Detailed records of every child he sold to work camps in California, every little girl he gave to brothels in Denver, every boy he shipped to factories back east. The room seemed to spin around Daniel. He was trafficking children for 15 years. Using his position as territorial judge to cover his tracks. Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks with her bound hands. I found the ledger books in his study, names, dates, prices. My own name was in there too, worth $50 to a textile mill in Massachusetts before he decided to keep me instead. Daniel's hands shook with rage. Where are these ledgers now? Gone. He burned them in the fireplace while I watched, laughing about how no one would ever believe a half-breed murderer over the word of a respected judge. Sarah's eyes were hollow with despair. Then he collapsed, gasping and clawing at his throat. I tried to help him, but he kept screaming that I'd poisoned him. When the housekeeper found us, he was already dead, and I was covered in his blood. Daniel stood and began pacing again, his mind racing. Someone planted that arsenic in your room. Someone who knew Thornfield was dying and wanted to make sure you took the blame. But who? Who else knew about the ledgers? Before Daniel could answer, the door burst open and Deputy Morrison stepped inside. Time's up, Crowfeather. Judge wants to reconvene. As Daniel moved toward the door, Sarah called out desperately, Daniel, there's something else. Something about that night. Later, he said firmly, but his eyes promised he would return. I'm going to find those ledgers, Sarah. Someone has them, and when I do, this whole town is going to learn what kind of man they've been worshiping. As the door closed behind him, Sarah slumped against the wall. She hadn't told him the most dangerous truth of all, that in those final moments, as Thornfield lay dying, he had whispered one last revelation that would destroy Daniel completely if he ever learned it. Some secrets, she realized, were more dangerous than any poison. The courthouse buzzed with nervous energy as the afternoon session began. Daniel had spent the recess questioning townsfolk, searching for anyone who might have seen something unusual the night Thornfield died. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, the judge's longtime housekeeper, took the witness stand with trembling hands. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her black dress bore the telltale stains of a woman who had scrubbed blood from floors. She avoided looking at Sarah entirely. Mrs. Whitman, Prosecutor Williams began, you discovered the defendant with Judge Thornfield's body, correct? Yes, sir. Her voice was barely audible. I heard terrible screaming from the study around midnight. When I got there, the judge was on the floor, and she was kneeling over him, covered in his blood. What exactly did you observe about the defendant's behavior? Mrs. Whitman's eyes darted nervously around the courtroom. She was speaking in that heathen tongue, Cherokee words, like she was casting some kind of spell over his body. The gallery erupted in horrified whispers. Sarah's heart sank. She had been praying in Cherokee, begging the spirits to guide Thornfield's soul to peace despite his crimes. but to these people, her sacred words sounded like witchcraft. Daniel rose from his seat. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is speculating about the defendant's intentions." Judge Harrison waved him down. "Overruled. Continue, Mrs. Whitman." "The next morning, when I was cleaning out her room like the sheriff asked, I found that bottle of poison wrapped up in her Indian prayer cloth, hidden under her mattress like she was saving it for something." Williams nodded smugly. "Did Judge Thornfield ever express concerns about the defendant's behavior?" Mrs. Whitman hesitated, her knuckles white as she gripped the witness stand rail. He said she'd been asking too many questions lately, about her family, about the children who used to live in the house before her. Daniel's pulse quickened. This was new information. He stood again. "Your Honor, I request permission to cross-examine this witness." "Proceed, Mr. Crowfeather." Daniel approached the witness stand slowly, studying Mrs. Whitman's nervous demeanor. Something wasn't right about her testimony, too rehearsed, too convenient. "Mrs. Whitman, how long have you worked for Judge Thornfield?" 15 years, sir, since right after his first wife died." "And in those 15 years, did you ever see the defendant display violent behavior toward anyone?" The housekeeper's eyes flickered. "Well, no, but did she ever threaten Judge Thornfield, raise her voice to him, show any signs of hatred or resentment?" "She was always quiet, too quiet if you ask me, like she was planning something." Daniel moved closer. "Mrs. Whitman, you said you heard screaming from the study, but Judge Thornfield's study is on the second floor, and your quarters are in the basement. How did you hear him so clearly?" The woman's face flushed red. I was just finishing my evening duties." "At midnight? What duties require you to be working so late?" Mrs. Whitman's voice became defensive. "I couldn't sleep. I was polishing silver in the kitchen." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "The kitchen is directly below the study, isn't it? You would have heard footsteps, conversations, any unusual activity up there." "Yes, sir." "Did you hear anyone else in the study that night? Any voices besides Judge Thornfield's?" The housekeeper hesitated too long. "No, sir. Just him. And her." "But Mrs. Whitman, you just testified that you heard the judge screaming. If my wife was speaking in Cherokee, as you claim, wouldn't you have heard her voice as well?" The woman's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She was whispering. The judge was the only one shouting." Daniel turned to face the jury. "So Judge Thornfield was shouting loud enough to wake you in the basement, but my wife was whispering so quietly you could barely hear her. Yet somehow you were able to determine she was speaking Cherokee rather than English?" "I know what I heard," Mrs. Whitman insisted, but her confidence was cracking. "I'm sure you do." Daniel's voice grew harder. "Now, about that bottle of arsenic. When exactly did you search my wife's room?" "The sheriff asked me to look through her things the next morning." "Before or after the coroner examined Judge Thornfield's body?" Mrs. Whitman blinked rapidly. "Before, I think. Or maybe after. I was very upset." "You were upset?" "Of course." Daniel walked back toward the evidence table. "Mrs. Whitman, where do you suppose my wife obtained this arsenic?" "I wouldn't know, sir." "Wouldn't you? You've managed that household for 15 years. You order supplies, handle deliveries, manage the household accounts. Surely you would notice if someone brought poison into the house?" The housekeeper's hands were shaking now. "Maybe she got it from someone on the reservation. They know about herbs and such." Daniel picked up the arsenic bottle, holding it where the jury could see it clearly. "This isn't herbs, Mrs. Whitman. This is refined arsenic, the kind sold by apothecaries for killing rats. It's expensive, costs about $2 a bottle. Did Judge Thornfield pay my wife wages?" "No, sir. He provided for her room and board." "So she had no money to purchase poison. and no way to leave the house unaccompanied to buy it. Yet somehow this bottle appeared in her possession. Daniel set the bottle down with deliberate care. Mrs. Whitman, did Judge Thornfield keep arsenic in the house for pest control? The question hit like a thunderbolt. Mrs. Whitman's face went white as fresh snow. There might have been some in the cellar storage. Might have been. Or was there definitely arsenic in the house already? Yes, she whispered. For the rats in the cellar. The courtroom fell silent as the implications sank in. Daniel had just proven that Sarah didn't need to obtain poison from outside sources. It was already available in the house she called home. But he wasn't finished. Daniel stepped closer to the witness stand, his voice cutting through the courthouse tension like a blade. Mrs. Whitman, you mentioned that Judge Thornfield expressed concerns about my wife asking questions about other children. What children? The housekeeper's face went ashen. Her eyes darted toward the gallery where several prominent townspeople sat, including Mayor Crawford and the bank president. I don't recall exactly. You don't recall? A moment ago you remembered his exact words about her asking too many questions. Surely you remember what those questions were about. Mrs. Whitman's hands twisted in her lap. There were Cherokee children who lived in the house over the years. For their education. Christian schooling. How many children? I don't know. They came and went. Daniel's jaw tightened. Sarah had told him about the ledgers, but seeing the fear in this woman's eyes confirmed something darker. Where did they go when they left? To families. Good Christian families who could provide proper homes. Without their parents' knowledge or consent? Prosecutor Williams shot to his feet. Objection! This line of questioning is irrelevant to the murder charge. Judge Harrison hesitated. Daniel could see the internal struggle on the man's face. Maintain order or allow the truth to surface. I'll allow it, but get to your point quickly, Mr. Crowfeather. Daniel nodded. Mrs. Whitman, did you ever see Judge Thornfield receive payments for placing these children with families? The question landed like a physical blow. Mrs. Whitman's face crumpled, and for a moment Daniel thought she might faint. I managed the household accounts. There were donations from grateful families. Donations? Or payments? Daniel retrieved a piece of paper from his coat. I spoke with Tom Fletcher at the telegraph office during recess. He kept copies of all messages sent from Judge Thornfield's office. Would you like me to read some of them? Mrs. Whitman looked trapped, her breathing shallow and rapid. Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, and Daniel noticed Mayor Crawford whispering urgently to the man beside him. Shipment of 6 ready for transport to Denver concerns, Daniel read aloud. Payment of $300 required upon delivery. That doesn't sound like a Christian adoption to me, Mrs. Whitman. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Sarah watched in amazement as Daniel systematically dismantled the carefully constructed lies that had protected Thornfield's reputation for years. Mrs. Whitman, Daniel continued relentlessly, how long have you known Judge Thornfield was selling Cherokee children? I never, she started, then stopped, her face crumbling completely. He said it was for their own good, said they'd have better lives away from the reservation. Better lives as slaves in textile mills? As servants in brothels? Daniel's voice rose with righteous fury. How many children, Mrs. Whitman? How many families destroyed? The housekeeper began sobbing, her composure completely shattered. I counted. I kept track in my own ledger. 47 children over 15 years. God forgive me, I kept track. The courthouse fell into stunned silence. Even Judge Harrison seemed shaken by the revelation. Sarah felt vindicated and horrified simultaneously. Her story was being corroborated, but at the cost of exposing a horror that had consumed nearly 50 innocent lives. Daniel pressed his advantage. And my wife discovered this ledger, didn't she? That's why Judge Thornfield was agitated that final night. Mrs. Whitman nodded through her tears. She found my records hidden in the kitchen pantry. She came to me crying, begging me to tell her about her own parents, about what really happened to Chief Standing Bear's family. What did you tell her? The truth, Mrs. Whitman's voice was barely a whisper. That Judge Thornfield murdered her parents by the river in 1870, that he'd been using her as a symbol of his civilizing mission while selling other children like cattle. The revelation hit the courtroom like thunder. Sarah saw the shock on Daniel's face as the final pieces of her story clicked into place. She was the daughter of a Cherokee chief, raised by the man who had murdered her family. So, Judge Thornfield knew his secret was exposed, Daniel said. He knew my wife could destroy him. Yes, sir. He was terrified. Started talking about ending it all before the government investigators arrived. Daniel paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Mrs. Whitman, did Judge Thornfield take his own life? The housekeeper's sobs intensified. I don't know. I swear I don't know. When I found them, he was already dead and she was praying over him in Cherokee. There was so much blood. But you planted the arsenic bottle in her room, didn't you? Mrs. Whitman looked up with red-rimmed eyes. Mr. Crawford told me to. Said if the truth came out about the children, the whole town would be ruined. Said better one person hang than hundreds lose everything. Mayor Crawford leaped to his feet in the gallery. That's a lie. She's lying to save herself. Judge Harrison banged his gavel furiously. Order! Mr. Crawford, sit down or I'll have you removed. But Daniel wasn't finished. Mrs. Whitman, where is your ledger now? The one with the names of all 47 children. I gave it to Mr. Crawford. He said he'd burn it to protect the town's reputation. Daniel turned to face Mayor Crawford directly. Interesting, because I have a copy right here. He pulled another document from his coat. Seems my wife made her own record before confronting Judge Thornfield. Names, dates, destinations, amounts paid. Everything. The color drained from Crawford's face as murmurs spread through the courtroom like wildfire. People began standing, some heading for the exits, others pressing closer to hear better. Your Honor, Daniel said formally, I submit that Judge Thornfield took his own life rather than face exposure as a child trafficker and murderer. My wife is innocent of all charges, and there's a conspiracy in this town to frame her to protect the reputation of those who were complicit in these crimes. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, not of sorrow, but of relief. After 15 years of silence, the truth was finally being spoken aloud. The children who had disappeared, the families who had grieved, her own murdered parents. They would finally have justice. But as she looked around the courtroom at the shocked and angry faces, she realized the danger was far from over. These people had built their prosperity on blood money from stolen children. They wouldn't give up without a fight. Judge Harrison struggled to maintain order as the courtroom descended into chaos. Voices rose in argument, accusations flew back and forth, and Sarah could see the fear in the eyes of those who had remained silent for too long. Daniel returned to her side and took her shackled hands in his. It's almost over, he whispered. The truth is out now. But Sarah knew better. In a town built on lies, the truth was the most dangerous weapon of all, and she could see in the hostile faces around them that some people would kill to keep their secrets buried. The storm was just beginning. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like gunfire as he struggled to restore order. The courthouse had descended into pandemonium, people shouting accusations, others fleeing toward the exits, and Mayor Crawford red-faced and bellowing denials from the gallery. Through it all, Sarah sat motionless, watching her carefully constructed world of lies finally crumble. "Clear the courtroom," Harrison shouted. "Everyone except essential personnel out, now!" Deputies moved through the crowd, herding spectators toward the doors. Sarah caught glimpses of familiar faces, the baker's wife who had always smiled at her in town, now staring with horror and disgust, the schoolteacher who had praised her penmanship, backing away as if Sarah carried some contagious disease. These people who had known her for years suddenly saw her not as the quiet servant girl, but as the daughter of a Cherokee chief they'd been taught to fear. As the crowds thinned, a new figure entered through the main doors, a tall man in a dusty federal marshal's badge catching the afternoon light. Sarah's breath caught. She recognized him from Daniel's descriptions. Marshal James Whitmore, Mrs. Whitman's estranged brother, who had been investigating reports of missing Cherokee children for months. Marshal Whitmore approached the bench with deliberate steps. "Your Honor, I'm here on federal business. We've received reports of human trafficking and the systematic kidnapping of Native American children from reservations across the territory." Judge Harrison looked like a man watching his own execution. "Marshal, this is a murder trial in territorial court. Federal jurisdiction doesn't—" "It does when the crimes cross state lines and involve federal treaty violations with sovereign Cherokee Nation," Whitmore interrupted firmly. He turned to face Mrs. Whitman, who had collapsed in the witness chair. "Eleanor, I got your telegram. Are you ready to tell the truth about what's been happening here?" Mrs. Whitman looked up at her brother with tear-stained cheeks. "Jimmy, I'm so sorry. I should have written to you years ago, but I was scared. Scared of what they'd do to me if I talked." Daniel moved closer to Sarah, his hand finding hers despite her shackles. She could feel his pulse racing through his fingertips, matching her own thundering heartbeat. "Mrs. Whitman," Marshal Whitmore said gently, "I need you to tell this court everything you know about Judge Thornfield's operation. Every detail, every name, every transaction." The housekeeper nodded shakily. "It started about 10 years after I began working for him. Cherokee families would come to the house desperate to find children who had been taken for education. The judge would tell them the children had been placed with good Christian families, but he never said where." "Did you keep records?" "Yes, in my own ledger, hidden in the kitchen. I wrote down every child's name, their age when they arrived, where they were sent, and—" Her voice broke. "How much money changed hands?" Sarah felt Daniel's grip tighten. She knew he was thinking of the Cherokee children in his own extended family who had vanished over the years. Cousins and clan brothers whose disappearances had been explained away as runaways or tragic accidents. Marshal Whitmore continued his questioning. "What changed the night Judge Thornfield died?" "Sarah found my ledger. She came to me crying, holding it in her hands, asking about the other children, about her own parents." Mrs. Whitman's voice gained strength as she continued. "I told her everything, about Chief Standing Bear's son and Judge Thornfield's first wife, about the murders by the river, about how the judge had been using her as a symbol of successful civilization while selling other children like livestock." "And Judge Thornfield's reaction?" "He was furious when he found out she knew. Started talking about how he'd rather die than see his reputation destroyed. He went to his study with a bottle of whiskey and—" Mrs. Whitman paused, struggling with the memory. "I heard him talking to himself for hours, ranting about government investigators and Cherokee lawsuits. Then the screaming started." Daniel leaned forward. "What kind of screaming?" "Pain. Terrible pain. When I got to the study, he was on the floor, writhing. There was foam around his mouth, and his eyes were rolled back. Sarah was trying to help him, speaking Cherokee prayers, but he kept pointing at her and gasping, 'You did this?'" Marshal Whitmore nodded grimly. "Classic symptoms of arsenic poisoning." "But you said Judge Thornfield was alone with the whiskey?" Mrs. Whitman's revelation hit the courtroom like lightning. He wasn't drinking whiskey. He was drinking from the bottle of arsenic he kept for pest control. The bottle was right there on his desk, empty. I think he meant to kill himself rather than face what was coming." Sarah felt the weight of 15 years lifting from her shoulders. The truth she had carried alone, that Thornfield had taken his own life in a final act of cowardice, was finally being spoken by someone else. "But you planted evidence to frame my wife," Daniel said, his voice hard as iron. Mrs. Whitman nodded miserably. "Mayor Crawford came to the house that night after the sheriff left. He said if the truth about the children came out, it would destroy the whole town. Half the businesses here were built on money from those sales. He said it was better to let one person hang than to ruin hundreds of families." "So you planted the arsenic bottle in Sarah's room?" "Yes, and I lied about hearing her threaten the judge. I lied about everything." Mrs. Whitman looked directly at Sarah for the first time. "I'm sorry. God help me, I'm so sorry." Marshal Whitmore turned to Judge Harrison. "Your Honor, based on this testimony and the federal investigation, I'm recommending all charges against Mrs. Morningstar be dropped immediately. We have evidence of conspiracy, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice by multiple town officials." Harrison looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "The court finds that new evidence has come to light that fundamentally undermines the prosecution's case. All charges against the defendant are hereby dismissed." Sarah felt Daniel's arms around her as Deputy Morrison unlocked her shackles. For the first time in weeks, her hands were free. But as she looked around the nearly empty courtroom, she realized their troubles were far from over. Mayor Crawford and several other men huddled near the back doors, their faces dark with anger and fear. These were people who had built their fortunes on stolen children and murdered families. They wouldn't simply accept justice and walk away. The truth had set her free, but in a town built on lies, the truth could also be deadly. The setting sun cast long shadows across Broken Arrow Township as Sarah and Daniel emerged from the courthouse into a world that had fundamentally changed in the span of a few hours. Marshal Whitmore walked beside them, his hand resting on his sidearm as his eyes swept the nearly deserted street. Word had spread quickly through the town. The respected Judge Thornfield was not only a child trafficker and murderer, but had taken his own life rather than face justice. "You need to leave town tonight," Whitmore said quietly as they approached the hitching post where Daniel's horse waited. "There are too many people here with too much to lose. Mayor Crawford's been whispering to his associates all afternoon, and I don't like the look in their eyes." Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the weight of hostile stares from windows and doorways. Mrs. Patterson stood on her porch, arms crossed, her face twisted with disgust. The banker, Mr. Holbrook, spat in the dust as they passed his establishment. These people who had once nodded politely to her on the street now saw her as the instrument of their ruin. "Where can we go?" Sarah asked. "They'll follow us anywhere in the territory." Daniel helped her mount his horse, his strong hands steady on her waist. The familiar gesture brought back memories of their secret rides to the Cherokee settlement 3 years ago, when their love had seemed possible despite the barriers between their worlds. "California," Marshal Whitmore answered. "I have contacts in San Francisco who can help you disappear until this settles down. The railroad leaves from Denver tomorrow evening." As they prepared to leave, a commotion erupted from the direction of Main Street. A group of men led by Mayor Crawford was marching toward the courthouse, torches blazing despite the daylight. Sarah could see the fury in their faces. These were men who had built their prosperity on stolen children and were now watching their carefully constructed world crumble. "Marshal," Crawford's voice boomed across the square, "that woman's testimony is lies and Cherokee witchcraft. Judge Thornfield was a pillar of this community, and we won't stand for his memory being defiled by a murderous half-breed." Whitmore stepped protectively in front of Sarah and Daniel. "Mr. Crawford, the evidence is overwhelming. We have testimony, financial records, and correspondence proving Judge Thornfield was trafficking children. The case is closed. Your case maybe, but not ours. Crawford's face was purple with rage. This town was built on Christian values and American progress. We civilized these lands, brought law and order to the wilderness. We won't let some Cherokee witch destroy everything we've worked for. The crowd behind Crawford muttered agreement, their torches casting dancing shadows on angry faces. Sarah recognized most of them. The blacksmith who had shod Daniel's horse, the store owner who had sold her fabric for mending, the preacher who had forced her to recite Christian prayers every Sunday. All of them complicit in varying degrees, all of them desperate to maintain the lies that had enriched them. Daniel's hand moved to his gun. Sarah, get behind me. But before the confrontation could escalate, another voice cut through the tension. That's enough! Mrs. Whitman emerged from the courthouse, her brother's federal badge gleaming on her chest, a temporary deputy sworn in to help with the investigation. I've spent 15 years living with the guilt of what we did to those children. 47 innocent souls sold like cattle, and for what? So you could build bigger houses and fancier stores. The crowd faltered, some men lowering their torches. Mrs. Whitman had been part of their community for decades, trusted and respected. Her words carried weight they couldn't simply dismiss. Eleanor, you've been bewitched, Crawford pleaded. That Cherokee girl has filled your head with lies and superstition. Judge Thornfield saved her from savagery, gave her a Christian education. Judge Thornfield murdered her parents. Mrs. Whitman's voice cracked like a whip, shot them down by the river like animals because his wife chose love over hatred. Then he stole their child and used her as a trophy while he sold other children to work camps and brothels. I have the receipts, Thomas. I have every transaction recorded in my own hand. Sarah watched the crowd's momentum shift as doubt crept into their faces. These were people who had known Mrs. Whitman longer than they had known the true nature of Thornfield's crimes. Her testimony forced them to confront the uncomfortable reality that their prosperity had been built on blood money. Even if it's true, the banker Holbrook called out, what's done is done. Hanging that girl won't bring those children back, but it might preserve what we've built here. Sometimes sacrifice is necessary for the greater good. The casual callousness of his words struck Sarah like a physical blow. This man was willing to murder her to protect his bank account, and he spoke of it as if discussing the weather. Daniel's gun cleared leather in one smooth motion, the barrel pointing directly at Holbrook's chest. The only sacrifice being made here is your conscience, and apparently you lost that a long time ago. Marshal Whitmore raised his hands, trying to prevent bloodshed. Everyone calm down. Mr. Crawford, I'm placing you and your associates under federal investigation for conspiracy and accessory to human trafficking. Anyone who interferes with this investigation or threatens these witnesses will face federal charges. But Crawford wasn't backing down. Federal law doesn't trump local justice, Marshal. This is our town, built by our sweat and sacrifice. We won't let outsiders destroy it based on the lies of a Cherokee half-breed and a hysterical woman. The racist slur hit Sarah like a slap, but it also ignited something fierce inside her. For 15 years she had remained silent, accepting their hatred and contempt. No more. She dismounted from Daniel's horse and stepped forward, her voice carrying across the square with newfound strength. My name is Sarah Morning Star, daughter of Chief Standing Bear's son, and the woman who chose love over your hatred. For 15 years I scrubbed your floors, mended your clothes, and listened to your prayers while you counted money made from stolen children. You want to know what witchcraft looks like. It's building prosperity on the graves of innocence. It's calling murder civilization and slavery education. Her words hung in the air like smoke from their torches. Several men in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, and Sarah could see the doubt spreading through their ranks. But I'm not here for revenge, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. I'm here for truth. Those 47 children deserve better than being sold like livestock. Their families deserve to know what happened to them. And I deserve to know who murdered my parents and why. Daniel moved to stand beside her, his gun still drawn but pointed toward the ground. Anyone who has a problem with the truth can take it up with me personally. The standoff stretched for long moments, tension crackling between the two groups like lightning before a storm. Then, one by one, some of the men in Crawford's crowd began to back away. Not all of them. The mayor and his core conspirators remained defiant, but enough to break the mob's momentum. "This isn't over," Crawford snarled. "You can hide behind federal badges and Cherokee magic, but this town knows what it knows. We'll be watching." As the crowd dispersed, Marshal Whitmore approached Sarah and Daniel. "You need to leave now, tonight. I can protect you from legal troubles, but I can't stop a lynch mob if they decide to take matters into their own hands." Sarah looked back at the courthouse one last time, then at the town where she had spent most of her life as a prisoner disguised as a ward. For the first time in 15 years, she was free to choose her own path. "Let's go," she said to Daniel. "There's nothing left for us here but ghosts and guilt." As they rode out of Broken Arrow Township, Sarah felt the weight of the past lifting from her shoulders. Behind them lay a lifetime of lies and suffering. Ahead stretched the promise of truth, justice, and perhaps, if they were fortunate, love reborn. 3 miles outside Broken Arrow Township, Daniel guided his horse off the main road onto a narrow trail that wound through stands of cottonwood trees. The moon had risen full and bright, casting silver light across the Oklahoma landscape. Sarah rode behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing against her back. They stopped at a small creek where Daniel had made camp during his weeks of investigation. A simple lean-to shelter constructed from branches and canvas provided protection from the elements, and the remains of previous campfires marked the spot where he had planned his strategy to save her life. "We should rest here until dawn," Daniel said, helping Sarah dismount. "The horses need water, and we need to talk about what comes next." Sarah knelt by the creek, cupping the cold water in her hands and splashing it on her face. The simple act felt like a baptism, washing away the courthouse dust and the weight of years spent in silence. When she looked up, Daniel was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You said we were married," she said quietly. "Common law marriage by Cherokee tradition. But Daniel, you know that ceremony by the creek 3 years ago? Elder Spotted Hawk never completed it. Thornfield's men came before we could finish the vows." Daniel sat heavily on a fallen log, his hands clasped between his knees. "I know. The marriage certificate I showed in court was forged. I had a friend in Denver create it, along with witness statements, just in case I needed legal standing to defend you." The admission hung between them like smoke from their small campfire. Sarah felt a strange mix of gratitude and betrayal. He had lied to save her life, but lies were what had brought them to this point in the first place. "Why?" she asked. "Why come back after 3 years of silence?" I wrote letters, Daniel, dozens of them. I waited for you to rescue me, to take me away from that house, but you never came." Daniel's jaw tightened, and he stared into the fire as if the flames might provide answers. "Because I got a letter, not from you, from Marshal Whitmore. He'd been investigating missing Cherokee children and found records indicating that Judge Thornfield's ward was the daughter of Chief Standing Bear's murdered son. He asked if I knew anything about a Cherokee girl named Sarah Morning Star." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "You knew? You knew who I really was before you came to the courthouse?" "I suspected. When we were together 3 years ago, you used to talk in your sleep sometimes. Cherokee words, fragments of songs. You'd mention names. Standing Bear, Little Wolf, Morning Star. I thought they were just dreams, memories from childhood stories. But when Whitmore's letter arrived, everything clicked into place. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. All this time she had believed Daniel loved her for who she was, the quiet servant girl who cleaned floors and mended clothes. But he had known she was Cherokee royalty, the daughter of a chief. Had that knowledge changed his feelings for her? "Is that why you came back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you found out I was somebody important? The daughter of a chief instead of just a servant?" Daniel looked up sharply, his gray eyes flashing with hurt and anger. "Jesus, Sarah, do you really think so little of me? Do you think I'm the kind of man who judges a woman's worth by her bloodline? I don't know what kind of man you are anymore. 3 years ago you disappeared without a word. Now you appear like some avenging angel with forged documents and federal marshals." "What am I supposed to think?" Daniel stood abruptly and began pacing beside the creek. "You want to know why I left? Fine. I'll tell you the truth, all of it." He stopped and faced her directly. "That night when Thornfield's men interrupted our ceremony, I was shot. Bullet caught me in the shoulder, knocked me into the creek. By the time I crawled out downstream, you were gone." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "I thought you had abandoned me. Thornfield said you ran away, that Cherokee men always abandon their women when things get difficult. I spent 2 weeks in a Cherokee healing lodge, delirious with fever from infection. When I finally recovered enough to ride, I went to Thornfield's house. Do you know what that bastard told me?" Daniel's voice cracked with old pain. "He said you were dead. Cholera outbreak. Showed me a grave marker with your name on it in the town cemetery." The words hit Sarah like hammer blows. She sank to her knees beside the creek, finally understanding the magnitude of Thornfield's cruelty. He hadn't just stolen her childhood and murdered her parents. He had stolen 3 years of love and happiness by convincing the one person who cared about her that she was dead. "For 3 years I visited that grave every month," Daniel continued, his voice thick with emotion, "left wildflowers and Cherokee prayer bundles. Talked to a headstone that contained the body of some stranger while you were locked away in that house, thinking I had abandoned you." Sarah began to cry. Not the silent tears she had learned in Thornfield's house, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from her very soul. Daniel knelt beside her and pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her grief and loss. They held each other by the creek as the moon traced its path across the sky, two souls reunited after years of believing the worst about each other. Finally, when her tears were spent, Sarah pulled back to look at Daniel's face in the moonlight. "What happens now?" she asked. "Marshal Whitmore wants us to go to California, but that's running away. Those 47 children deserve justice. Their families deserve to know what happened to them." Daniel tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly familiar from their time together years ago. "The Marshal's investigation will continue. Crawford and the others will face federal charges. But Sarah, we can't fight this battle alone. We've already done our part by exposing the truth." "And us? What happens to us?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if memorizing every feature. "That depends on what you want. 3 years ago, we were going to build a life together, maybe start a family. But we're different people now. You've survived things that would have broken most people, and I've spent 3 years thinking you were dead. We can't just pick up where we left off." Sarah nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. "But maybe we can start over, not as the people we were, but as the people we've become." Daniel smiled for the first time since he'd walked into that courthouse. "I'd like that. Though I should probably mention, I never did learn to speak Cherokee properly. You'll have to teach me your real name." "Sarah Morning Star," she said softly. but you can call me Morning Star. That's who I want to be now." As dawn approached, they began planning their journey west toward a future built on truth instead of lies, love instead of duty, and hope instead of despair. The train whistle echoed across the Denver platform as Sarah and Daniel boarded the westbound locomotive that would carry them toward their new life in California. Sarah clutched a small leather pouch containing the few possessions she had salvaged from her years in Thornfield's house: her mother's Cherokee prayer beads, carefully hidden for 15 years, and a pressed wildflower from their interrupted wedding ceremony 3 years ago. As the train pulled away from the station, Sarah pressed her face to the window and watched the Colorado landscape roll past. For the first time in her adult life, she was traveling not as someone's property or ward, but as a free woman choosing her own destination. The sensation was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Penny for your thoughts," Daniel said, settling beside her in the passenger compartment they shared with 2 other travelers, an elderly couple heading to visit their grandchildren in Sacramento. "I keep expecting someone to stop us," Sarah admitted quietly, "to drag me back to face charges or accusations. I've lived so long under Thornfield's control that freedom feels impossible." The elderly woman across from them, Mrs. Catherine Morrison, looked up from her knitting. "Freedom's like learning to walk again after being bedridden for months," she said with the wisdom of her 70 years. "Takes time to trust your own legs to carry you." Her husband Edgar nodded in agreement. "We lost our farm to the bank 15 years ago. Thought our lives were over. But sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to something better." He squeezed his wife's hand. "We never would have met our grandchildren if we hadn't moved west to start over." Sarah found comfort in their words, in the quiet dignity of this couple who had faced their own trials and emerged stronger. She realized that survival wasn't just about enduring suffering. It was about finding the courage to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. As the train swayed gently through the mountain passes, Daniel told Sarah about his plans for their future. He had saved enough money from his work as a horse trainer to purchase a small ranch outside San Francisco, where they could raise horses and perhaps start a family school for Cherokee and mixed heritage children. "A school?" Sarah's eyes lit up with interest. "Think about it," Daniel said earnestly. "How many children are caught between 2 worlds the way you were? Cherokee children forced to abandon their heritage, white children who need to understand the land they're inheriting. We could teach both. Cherokee traditions alongside American citizenship, respect for the earth alongside practical skills." The idea resonated deeply with Sarah. She thought of the 47 children who had disappeared into Thornfield's trafficking network, of the families who would never see their sons and daughters again. She couldn't bring those children home, but she could perhaps prevent other families from suffering the same loss. As evening approached, the train stopped in a small town called Cedar Creek for water and supplies. Sarah and Daniel stepped onto the platform to stretch their legs, and Sarah was struck by the sight of a Cherokee family camped near the depot. 3 generations, grandparents, parents, and 2 small children, huddled around a modest fire, cooking their evening meal. "Excuse me," Sarah approached them hesitantly. "I'm Cherokee too. Are you traveling far?" The grandmother looked up with sharp, assessing eyes. "We're going to the new reservation in Arizona. Government says we have to move again, leave the land where our ancestors are buried." She studied Sarah's face carefully. "You have Cherokee features, but you speak like a white woman." Sarah's cheeks burned with shame. "I was taken from my family as a child. Raised by a white man who forbade me to speak Cherokee or practice our ways." The grandmother's expression softened immediately. "Ah, child, you are one of the lost ones. Come sit with us. Let me hear what Cherokee words you remember." For the next hour, Sarah sat by the fire, listening to the grandmother speak in their native tongue. Slowly, buried memories began to surface, lullabies her mother had sung, stories her father had told, the rhythm and music of a language she had been forced to forget. "Your Cherokee name?" the grandmother asked. "Do you remember it?" "Morning Star," Sarah whispered, and the words felt like coming home. When the train whistle called them back, the grandmother pressed a small bundle into Sarah's hands. "Sage and sweetgrass for cleansing ceremonies. You have been living in darkness for many years, child. Now you must learn to walk in the light again." Back on the train, Sarah sat beside Daniel with tears streaming down her face. But these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of recognition, of finding pieces of herself she thought were lost forever. "Tell me about your parents," Daniel said gently. "Not what Thornfield told you, but what you remember." Sarah closed her eyes and let the memories flow. "My father had hands like yours, gentle with horses, strong enough to lift me to his shoulders. He used to carve small animals from wood and hide them around our lodge for me to find. My mother sang while she cooked Cherokee songs about the seasons and the spirits in the trees." As she spoke, Sarah realized that Thornfield's greatest cruelty hadn't been the physical abuse or the years of servitude. It had been convincing her that her heritage was something to be ashamed of, that her parents' love had been somehow inferior to his civilized care. "They loved me," she said with wonder, as if the realization was entirely new. "They didn't abandon me or die of some disease. They were murdered because they refused to give up their land and their beliefs. They died protecting what they valued most." Daniel took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "And their daughter survived to tell their story, to make sure their sacrifice meant something." The train rolled through the night toward California, carrying two souls who had been broken by lies and were slowly healing through truth. In the morning, they would reach San Francisco and begin the practical work of building a new life. But in the darkness of the passenger car, surrounded by the gentle sounds of sleeping travelers, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 15 years, genuine hope for the future. Mrs. Morrison had been right. Freedom was like learning to walk again after being bedridden. Each step was uncertain, sometimes painful, but each step also carried her further away from the prison of her past and closer to the promise of what she could become. As dawn broke over the Sierra Nevada mountains, Sarah pressed her face to the window and watched the sun paint the peaks gold and crimson. Somewhere in that vast landscape ahead lay a ranch where Cherokee children could learn their heritage alongside American citizenship, where love could flourish without fear, where a woman named Morning Star could finally claim her true identity. The train whistle sounded again, not mournful like the cry of a mourning dove, but triumphant like the call of a hawk soaring free above the mountains. Sarah smiled and squeezed Daniel's hand, ready to embrace whatever challenges and joys awaited them in the golden state ahead. Message for American seniors. Dear friends, sometimes life forces us into roles we never chose. Dutiful caretaker, silent sufferer, forgotten dreamer. Sarah's story reminds us that it's never too late to reclaim your true identity, to speak your truth, and to build something beautiful from the ashes of what was lost. Whether you've spent years caring for others, keeping family secrets, or putting your own dreams on hold, remember that your authentic self is still there, waiting to be rediscovered. Like Sarah finding her Cherokee name after 15 years of silence, you too can reconnect with the person you were meant to be. Your wisdom, your experiences, your authentic voice, they matter now more than ever. The courage to start over, to love again, to dream again doesn't diminish with age. It deepens with understanding. Questions for you. Have you ever felt like you lost parts of yourself while taking care of others or fulfilling family obligations? What dreams or aspects of your identity are you ready to reclaim in this chapter of your life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.